everybody. It's Melissa Killeleagh. We're here in the studio at Finger Lakes 1, January 16th, 2018. It's our first podcast of the year for the Melissa Killeleagh Show. For those of you who don't know me, I am a mom and entrepreneur living here in the town of Seneca Falls, New York. As you may or may not know, the birthplace of women's rights. So it's a beautiful legacy to stand on. And for today's podcast, it's certainly appropriate as well. Here in the studio today, we're going to be talking to our guest, Melina Carnicelli, who is an incredible voice and activist and community member in our area. I would say residing in all of the Finger Lakes region, if not citizen of the world, right? Because if there's anything to be involved in that is asking people to step up and find their own voice and find their own leadership, Melina is definitely at the helm of that ship. So I want to thank you so much for coming on board today. And just a little bit about the show. So one of the things I love to do is I love to feature people that I consider to be everyday heroes, the people who are out there fighting the good fight, so to say. And today we'll be really focused on the Women March in Seneca Falls, which is next Saturday, January 20th. So for those of you out there who would like to join us, we'll be sharing all of those details throughout the course of the podcast today. And the specific segment that I invited Melina here for today is women who make the world a better place. Right? And so that is who Melina is to me. I'm going to share a little bit about my history when it comes to that story. And then we'll also be hearing a little bit from Jim Sinacropi, owner of Finger Lakes 1 TV here, because he is actually kindly going to be contributing some incredible services for our march next weekend. So we'll be chatting with him later, Men Who Make a Difference, and then Melina and I will be wrapping up with some ideas and inspiration for you because, of course, if you're out and about in the community next Saturday, you should be with us at the Women March. So without further ado, turning it over to Melina. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
What a beautiful, heartfelt introduction. I'm honored, Melissa.
I've been chasing you for years. You know that.
So what a wonderful person to be chased by. Thank you.
I love it. I love it. I'm so impressed by all of the work that you do, but right now so focused on the Women March here in Seneca Falls. Yeah. And I would love for you to share a little bit about the march with our viewers today. And then, maybe we could talk a little bit about what has gotten you onto this path, because I know you've had quite an incredible journey to get here today.
Oh, so, thanks. Yeah. Well, I love to be here. I'm grateful to be here to chat about the march, the upcoming march. This year, 2018, is actually the first anniversary of the 700 women's marches that happened last year, 2017, in January. So we are celebrating the first anniversary of those historic marches from last year, and once again being dedicated to women's equality. So the title of this year's march is called Persisters. For women's equality, exactly. And we're all persisters, and even though that's a feminine noun, we welcome men as well, boys, girls, everyone to be part of this march and to become persisters for women's equality. So this is this Saturday, and all of the pieces have pretty much fallen into place
after a lot of very meticulous work.
Very meticulous, very tedious. Maybe there's 1 zillion details to get this all to come off, much like last year. Last year we actually did it, put it all together and welcomed 10,000 people to Seneca Falls in just about 6 weeks' time. This year, we are into our 8th week. We're into our 8th week of planning, so we've had a little bit more time to get it together. But what's different this year from last year is that we have been a group of organizers that have stayed together for over a year now. We're into our 14th month of being community activists and organizers. We have stayed together since last December 6th, I believe, was our first meeting for
That's
Women
incredible.
March in Seneca Falls. Yeah. And what we decided at that very first meeting, that very first gathering, was that we would stay together as a group for at least 4 years.
Wow.
And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and be organizers of a gathering for at least the next 4 years in Seneca Falls, a women's march in Seneca Falls. So I'm not only here to talk about the march that's upcoming in a few days, but also to invite everybody to put us on your calendar for
the next
2019 and 2020.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, I love 2020 coming up. I'm like, okay, that's going to be the year for big vision, right? Because 2020. But Melina, I have to thank you because last year I got to participate in the march and just soak it all up and really enjoy the, first of all, the incredible number, the overwhelming number of people that were here. Yeah. And also the flavor of it, which was so welcoming and so, you know, when you talk about being inclusive, it was very clear from opening remarks on that this was not a place where anyone would come together to have any kind of negative comments or hatred about what's going on in the country. Like, all we could do in this moment is stand together for the very thing we're talking about, which is women's equality, right?
Oh, exactly.
So that
right.
was lovely.
Yeah. And thank you so much for mentioning that. Your comments really echoed many responses that we had even before the march last year from our social media, and how we put the information out and why we put it out in the way we did, and which we continue to do. This really is a peaceful, nonpartisan, inclusive gathering, and by that we truly do mean everyone. Everyone who can come together to peacefully voice or listen to information about women's equality and how we can continue to move in that direction with our community action, with our work in our private life, with our work in our family life, even by intention. Because I really happen to believe that even the thought about women's equality accrues positively to those of us that are actually involved in physical action.
Yeah.
So that is the flavor. And I always love to comment or finish my statement about that. Last year after the event, and so you were there and with another 9,999 people.
If not more.
If not more, right? And to be, for me, it was such an honor to be at the podium, but to be at that podium and then see that wonderful sea of people who came together with a common cause, with such an open, peaceful outlook for the day. When it was over at the space where we had the morning rally, I hung back and did not join the march right away because I was going to help the park rangers clean up or do whatever needed to be done after all those folks started to march. When everyone was gone and the entire grassy space was opened up again, and by the way, it was all grassy. It was 50 degrees and sunny, which we're hoping for this Saturday. That it was an entire green, grassy area.
Wow.
And there was not one empty water bottle, gum wrapper, Kleenex, piece of paper.
Respect.
It was the visible demonstration to me, and I got to tell you, even after a year, I get choked up talking about that, because even after a year of thinking about that and visualizing that, 10,000 people in that space not only were honorable and honoring each other, but also were honoring to Mother Earth, which supported us during that whole thing with a gorgeous day and solid ground. So that was a very, very touching moment for me in my life So
yeah, absolutely.
I expect much the same.
And I feel like it's so very much also honoring the legacy they're standing on at that moment.
Exactly.
Right? Which is beautiful.
Now,
here's what I always wonder about. And then we'll talk more about the march. We'll talk more about the details, because I'd love to share some information about speakers and the lineup and all of that kind of thing, so people know like what it's going to feel like as it unravels, or unfolds, I should say. Did you ever picture yourself standing in front of that podium talking to 10,000 people?
Well, I have in my life had opportunities to speak in front of large gatherings. I'm not quite sure that there was ever 10,000 people, however.
Yeah.
So while I'm certainly not a neophyte to public speaking or even being in leadership roles, that was a highlight of my public experience in life. So we began to envision the march with 400 people.
So incredible.
And in fact, the very first day that I went to the Women's Rights National Historical Park to get a permit to use the adjacent space, there's a question of what the size of the crowd that you're expecting. Mm-hmm. And I put 4-500. And the ranger said, the space can hold more than that. Maybe you want to put more. I said, okay. So we wrote 800. And as the weeks and days unfolded and the response on the social media was immediate, and hundreds and hundreds, and then thousands and thousands. And then the morning of the march, we expected about 6,000 to 7,000 people. And, we were informed by the public safety officers that when they did, however they do that count of crowds, that they told us 10,000. So,
it's so interesting, because when I picture you up there in front of all those people, I think to the first couple of times I experienced you in front of a room full of people, and it was a room full of sisters, right? And so I'm more accustomed to maybe a couple hundred people, and creating this very supported, it's like having a nice warm blanket wrapped around you when you get up there in front of like a couple hundred people, right? So the fact that you can get up and do that in front of and with 10,000 people to hold that kind of space is so incredible. So tell us a little bit about your background and your experience that has brought you here, because I'll share my own version of the story, but I haven't lived in those shoes.
You want to go first?
I will. I'll share. I'll share a little bit with our viewers. So I remember back, let's see, when did it first begin? So out of graduate school, I was working with a public accounting firm down in Ithaca. And I was going to school board meetings at Ithaca City School District. You know where I'm going with that one, right? And I would go to school board meetings just because I really enjoyed trying to understand whether or not the schools were lining up their values with where they were actually putting the money. Because they were talking about all of these multicultural initiatives, and they were cutting all the programs. And I was like, wait a second. And it was interesting to be part of that dialogue, because I didn't have a truly vested interest other than being a citizen, right? I wasn't paying taxes at the time in terms of, school taxes.
May I interrupt? Yeah. The most truly vested person then as a citizen.
Right. But like my dollars weren't there. It's just the love, the thought process, the community. Yeah. So that's the first time your name popped up.
Okay.
Right. And then I became the auditor for Ithaca City School District for a short period of time while I was working with them. And I just remember having that moment where I was like, oh, female superintendent of Ithaca City School District. I love it. I love it, right? And everyone talked to me about your legacy there and the kind of spirit that you brought. So there was the seed. I need to meet this woman. I need to meet this woman. And then eventually I was up at City of Auburn and I was the auditor up there for a while. Same thing. I kept crossing paths with people, but I was always like too far behind you, right? You had already left and gone on to do whatever was next in the journey. And knowing that you were the mayor of Auburn, and first female mayor of Auburn.
And
right?
only, unfortunately, and only to this day.
Yeah. So for me, like, that really just continued that reminder to keep setting big goals and keep dreaming big dreams, right? And then, of course, we crossed paths at Room Full of Sisters for the first time in person. And I'm like, there she is. There's my legacy right there. Legend, right? Legend. You're not my legacy. And I have to imagine that for so many people in this area, you do the same thing. You inspire that same kind of drive and determination, but from that beautiful place. It's not drive and determination of like going for this like outward goal of, oh, I've got to go make this money or do this thing. It's this empowerment, this leadership that rises from within, knowing that we're here to do great work, right? Yeah. So tell us about that work, because you've been doing it for a long time.
I have. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you for all that background detail, because a few of the things you said I didn't know. But a correction, my role at the Ithaca City School District was assistant superintendent.
Okay. Still.
So
beautiful.
Having that correction. You know, the blessings in my life started early on, even the conscious recognition of the women in my life who were just pillars of love, fun, strength, wildness, intelligence, interest, care, and social awareness. Now, having said that about the women pillars in my life, the men in my life were too. The women always stand out because there was such a wonderfully large base of women. So it wasn't only my mother and her friends and my grandmothers, but the neighborhood women. And the neighborhood women were extraordinary because their strengths were from their place as stay-at-home moms in those days, which was almost like 1,000 years ago now. Many years ago. You know, their place, their role was housewife, mother, cook, clean the house kind of thing. And on the side, they did all their leadership stuff. They did their community stuff. They did their friendship stuff, which was always rooted in, again, strength, fun, goodness. So that's the role modeling that I had from a very young girl. And I must say that I'm about to be 70 years old. Just so that you know that I've got a few decades of experience.
I don't respond the way that I do because I think that's old. I respond the way that I do because for me, you're always timeless.
Yeah, I feel
I'm always trying to track how you fit all of these things into this period of time.
Yeah. So for many decades. But I will say from my earliest memory, I recall from both my mother and father that I could do and be whatever. Here's a quote: "Whatever you put your mind to, Melina." I mean, that is like right out of my mother's mouth. Yeah. Whatever you put your mind to, Melina. And so I put my mind to a lot of different things. And again, that role modeling of community work, family work, extended family, from a place of goodness is just goodness, meaning for the good of all. Has certainly been a part of in between all my cells of my body and my mind and my heart forever. So I guess that is where I got my start.
Yeah,
that is it. And so through school, I was motivated through young school and
And where did you go to school?
In Auburn. I grew up in Auburn, New York. Went to Catholic high school that was mainly populated by children, second-generation Italian-American immigrants, from Italian-American immigrants. And then I went to public high school. After
that.
that.
Must have been a transition.
It was, but I loved it. I loved it. No uniforms.
Freedom, right?
Yeah. I loved it. And then I went on to the SUNY system for college and graduate work. So I've been rooted in Central New York my whole life. Had an opportunity to move to California at a young age after college, and decided against that, and stayed here.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question anymore. This is kind of like my...
No, you are. This is the journey. Right? This is the journey. I love that you talked about all of these different characteristics. I wrote them down, actually. And I might get yelled at after the show, because whenever I tap on here, right, it makes a lot of noise. But recently, so I'd say probably in the past year, I really, really went to work on figuring out why I constantly felt like I was swimming upstream, and why I was making life so much more difficult than it needed to be. And it was because I was constantly chasing these external goals, right? It's like watching your life like you're on television, right? I've got to go do this thing. We have this like projected timeline of when we go to school and get married and have kids and do the things, right? When you buy your house, when you do this, when you do that. And even in my business, so 3 years ago, I left my full-time work to kind of jump into the world of being an entrepreneur, and really listening to my heart and following my path. And I was still following this idea of like, got to make the money, got to get the titles, got to do the things, right? And recently, the transition, since my son was born, right? So that's no coincidence, so about 20 months ago now, I realized that the transition needed to be more and do less, right? And if I could be these things that I feel in my heart, then the doing part would just all fall into place. The right things would come before me, the right opportunities, the right people. I would show up where I'm meant to be and do the work that I'm meant to do, which I feel is more like service than work, right? It's like, how do we serve our fellow human beings? How do we serve ourselves? How do we serve our families, right? Like coming from that place. So when you talk about these characteristics, love, fun, strength, wildness, interest, care, social awareness, it reminds me that we have to have this very strong internal navigation system. And I was on a podcast last week with Gwen Weber-McLeod. I know she's a dear friend of yours.
Yes.
And that's exactly what we were talking about, is having this really deeply entrenched and embodied sense of who we are, right? So I would love if you would talk a little bit about that. When you are standing in front of those 10,000 women, well, women, men, everybody, what are the values that you hold closest to your heart in those moments?
In those moments, that's a beautiful, beautiful question, because here's how I want to respond to that. Whether it's 10,000 people I'm with, or in front of, or one person that I'm with, I'm always wanting to be in a place of love and respect simultaneously. And maybe just even saying respect, because that then also suggests that there's an open-heartedness to whatever that person or persons are bringing to me, and complementing or completing even who I am and what I am. But yeah, that's really what I'm aware of. A deep respect for whoever they are, whoever they're choosing to be in behaviorally even. And I'm not Pollyanna-ish. I've never been Pollyanna-ish, but I will say that, having said that, I don't connect up with, bullying behavior or errant behavior or criminal behavior. But the essence of a person, to me, is besides their behavior. So that's what I'm conscious of, and I'm sure there are other kinds of things that I'm not so conscious of, but I'm very interested in people. I just think people are incredible, and in many, many ways. So I'm always very interested to know about people and to learn something new or to have a new experience.
Yeah, that curiosity, that deep curiosity. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that the way you said what you said takes me back to the doing less and being more, right? Yeah. It's that theme constantly. It's like who we are, which is the person, right, versus what we're doing, which is the behavior. So you can kind of like tease those apart, and what we really get to is like, who is this spirit? Who is this soul? Like who is this in front of me, right? And when I start thinking on that level, I love to think about things like what is the purpose of my soul here on this planet? What is the purpose of your soul here on this planet? We've talked a lot about the purpose that you've embodied coming here, but beyond this, like, what is the legacy that you wish to leave in this world? Like when we look back and we say, here's the story of Melina Carnicelli, right? Obviously, you're telling a tale of love and respect, right? Because when we show up as those things, like, we leave no option other than for people to walk away feeling love and respect, right? Which I think is the most beautiful legacy in and of itself. But I know that there's more to it for you, so we have to know. Well,
but I will say, at my passing from this existence, if anyone was to say, she was just about love and respect, that would be plenty for me. That really would be plenty for me. But I also really do enjoy life, and I enjoy all aspects of life, and even those difficult, sad, hard times are experiences that are worthy as much as those glorious, happy, passionate, wonderful times. So I have come to learn that over my lifetime. When my mother passed, and in the deep throes of mourning, that became very clear to me, that even the mourning that I was going through was so worthy of my honor and respect. That emotion was as valuable to me as bliss that I have found in my life. So I guess to answer directly your question about a legacy, I think if anybody was to say, boy, she really loved life, that would sum it up. That would sum it up.
I love it. I know that about you. And I love it.
Thanks.
And one of the things that you said, so when you were thinking about that process of mourning, I think one of the greatest inspirations to me that I constantly see in you, and for anyone out there who's watching who knows me, they know how much I appreciate this, is the ability to be all things, right? Well. So often in life, we're asked to choose.
Yeah.
Right? And this is when I get a little emotional, right? But, for example, asked to choose whether to stay at home with children or work. Well, the answer is we can do both if we choose, right? If we choose. Whether or not we want to love and be curious about all people, but also be that introverted person who recharges at home with a book, fireside, right? Be all the things, right? The answer is never either or. It's how do we embody all of it? How do we appreciate the bliss at the same time that we stay present and honor the morning.
Yeah.
And that is so incredible. And the fact that I get to see that in you is even more incredible. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank
now,
you. You're pretty incredible yourself, you know.
You.
And another thing that people who know me have heard me say repeatedly, that the reason I believe that you can recognize those qualities in me is because they're resident in you.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, and we could extend even that philosophy to the question you asked me about, like, you know, what am I thinking when I'm looking at 10,000 people? Well, I do have respect for myself. Mm-hmm. And because I have respect for myself,
you can hold that respect.
It's easier for me to believe that everyone is worthy of that respect.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think this is the essence of the work that continues in our community. It's sort of like this ever-evolving, almost, you know, mentoring, passing through these kinds of sentiments, these kinds of values, this way of living and working and being. This is how it happens, right? So for you to say that to me, it resonates in such a deep way, because this year you asked me to come sit at the table and be part of the organizers. Now, granted, my work is often very limited, and it's whatever I can do while Jack is asleep, or with Dad.
I get that. I've been there.
But it was wonderful to even just have moments where I could sit and take in what was going on at that table. And it means so much more now, too, to know that the commitment was made to be there for 4 years, to stay together as a group of women, because it's not always easy to do that, especially when you have people who are, you know, crossing over party lines and all different kinds of things. And the group comes together in a very cohesive way that gets things done. Yeah, right?
I guess so.
Gets things done. Because we have a great organizer, but also because the energy and the synergy amongst the group is really fantastic. So thank you for inviting me to be part of that. But I think that's how it happens, right? It's like we have to continue to be looking around and asking people. And it's not even a matter of like age in terms of intergenerational work, because it could be me turning right back around and, you know, and asking my mom to be part of the group, right? But it's how do we share and pass on those values? How do we create that ripple effect? And that I think is the essence of what happens here. You know, it's as I see and recognize that in you, and you honor that in me, it strengthens. Yes. And then I'm able to continue to pass that along and do the same. So it's really a beautiful process. Well, I would love to know a little bit about some of your inspiration, some of your leaders, some of your gurus, some of the people that you look to for that kind of inspiration. Also, you know, once we talk about that a little bit, that might even tie into some of the speakers and participants for the march, and we can talk more about the details so we could share with our viewers.
Oh, okay. Well, I talked about my childhood role models. I will say I am very drawn to people who are in leadership roles and present what they're doing as heart work, not hard work, although I know it's hard work, but as heart work. So people that present leadership or demonstrate leadership from that place always gets my attention. And so as far as role models go, like kind of in the big world of people that we know or have known about historically, are pretty traditional, those kinds of role models. But I will say there's probably not a day that goes by where I'm interacting outside my house. Of course, my family are wonderful to me, but when I'm outside my house and interact with people, I can always recognize that there's some type of leadership that I'm connecting up with, or that I recognize and think, oh, I could do better in that area because look at what he did, look at what she did. So that's kind of how I look at life, and in my personal life, in my business life, there have been many people, many women who have led me on. Dear friends of mine who, even from a very young age, who demonstrated emotion, the whole gamut of emotion, with such sophistication, and literally showed me the way of how I could demonstrate leadership with heart, and also be in touch with all of my emotions and learn from that. You mentioned Gwen was on your show last week. Gwen and I have been friends.
I was on her show.
Oh, you were on her show.
Yeah.
Oh, what? Even better, right? Yeah. Gwen and I have been friends for decades, and we started our entrepreneurship together many years ago, and like, could you ask for anyone else better than that to be your friend? That is also demonstrates leadership.
Absolutely.
So I have many friends like that. Many Gwens. Many Gwens that have many Gwens, many Kathys, many Marias, many Melissas, many that have helped me. Certainly in the political arena, when I decided to run for office, I ran for office twice. And won both. I certainly had, the political acumen in my in my background thinking of Eleanor Roosevelt, like, oh my goodness, what she did around social justice, how she led the country, even though she wasn't the president, but how she led the country. Hillary Clinton, all that she did for years and years and years in leadership roles. So the different areas of my life. I also taught, I was a classroom teacher for years. And I will speak Bella Gargill's name because she was my mentor as an exemplary teacher when I was 21 years old.
That's fantastic.
And, my friend Maureen, who was the best first grade teacher I've ever come across, who taught hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids to read, even the kids even the 6-year-olds that everybody said couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the type of people.
Yeah. And and it sounds like people come from so many different backgrounds.
Exactly.
And this whole sort of full spectrum of life. Yeah. And what I love too is I picked up not only on this idea of the heart-centered leadership, but people who are asking you to grow and expand yourself. And so when you think about it like that, the other thing that I love is it doesn't have to be the traditional leaders or heroes that inspire us, right? It could be the manager at Wegmans because they're so incredibly good at what they do when it comes to customer service, and you see them interact with people and how they can carry themselves. So
it can be your immediate family members who teach you how to use social media. Your grandchildren teach you how to use social media, and
I'm being taught patience.
You're being taught patience. I learned how to cook from a man I've been with forever and ever and ever. He's the best. So there's a lot that each person that we come in contact with can teach. So,
I love it.
And lead.
All right. Well, for everyone who's watching, this is Melina Carnicelli, and she is definitely a woman who makes the world a better place. And now we're going to ask her to share some of the details with all of you about Women March in Seneca Falls next weekend, January 20th. So that'll be the wrap-up of our show, because here's the deal. If you want some ideas and inspiration, join us next weekend. That is a place where you will get inspired. That is a place where everyone will be sharing lots of different ideas. I'm sure Melina will share a little bit more about the principles that guide us in the work that we do. And I'd love to hear a little bit from Jim Sinacropi after that as well, just to talk to us about the way that they plan to capture these moments for us so that we can share them with all of you who can't be present with us. So Melina, Tell us all about what everyone can expect next weekend.
And my gratitude to Melissa and Jim for inviting me here today. This weekend this Saturday is January 20th, so join us. The morning rally, starts at 10 a.m. But those of you who are planning to be here and drive yourself to Seneca Falls, come early so you can find a place to park. There's on-street parking, free on-street parking everywhere. There are lots that are designated lots. If you go to our Facebook page, Women March Seneca Falls, on Facebook, the maps are there with all information. Please do that, but come early so you can get a place to park. The rally starts at 10, and it's going to be 1 hour. We have the privilege of welcoming Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, as well as Mayor Lovely Warren from Rochester will be with us, and many other wonderful invited guests who are going to speak in the morning and the afternoon. Those two rallies are bookends to the march, which is going to step off at exactly 11:10 a.m. Through the town and end up at the community center for the afternoon rally that begins at 12:05. The rally features speakers that are addressing the unity principles of our group, Women March in Seneca Falls, and the unity principles are these: equal pay, gender parity in elected office, passage of the proposed Equal Rights Amendment, reproductive rights, LGBTQIA rights, immigrant rights, environmental justice, disability rights, ending systemic racism and sexism, and eradicating violence against women. So those are the topics that our speakers will be presenting on, and we welcome you to be with us this weekend, this Saturday, in Seneca Falls.
Thanks, Melina. So, Jim, what is the plan? I hear that you have put together quite a spectacular offer to capture all of this rally and do some personal interviews with the people who are participating. So I'm excited to see what this will look like.
We have a drone set to come that will get a lot of the first rally in the march. So we're going to get footage from well above, and if you see the drone, look up and wave to it. And then I'm going to be out during the actual march. I'm going to ask marchers why they're marching. So think of a good answer. Maybe you'll make the video. And then we're going to capture all the speeches as well. But we'll put together later Saturday night. We'll put together a 6 to 10 minute video of highlights and montage of marchers and footage, just to kind of capture the event, in a 10-minute, recap video that should be online by Sunday morning for everybody to enjoy at fingerlakes1.com and the Women March YouTube page. And then we'll post all the speeches and so I'm hope for good weather. Last year we had planned on live streaming, but the event, there's so many people there that the internet became crippled in Seneca Falls. You couldn't even take a picture and upload it to Facebook.
Yeah, I remember.
So that kind of took everybody by surprise. So this year, we're going to go with a post-produced video of the event with the goal of having it up for the next morning, so everybody that was there can wake up the next morning and check it out. And fingers crossed for good weather. I don't think it could ever be as good as it was last year, but as long as it's but actually the forecast right now is warm for January. Yeah. So fingers crossed that it doesn't that we don't get much rain, if any rain, and maybe the sun will shine a little bit, and that maybe Seneca Falls is a little more prepared this year to handle it. Last year was amazing. It was just amazing. As a lifelong resident of Seneca Falls, it made me proud that because it was a national movement, but so many chose to come to Seneca Falls. Mm-hmm. So that to me made me proud, and I was proud of the way that Seneca Falls welcomed and embraced the throngs of people. It was perfect. It really was. It was beautiful.
It really was.
But maybe some of the local businesses this year will expect, be more expectant of the crowds, and it's great. It's amazing in Seneca Falls that, like, in December we have an event, the Wonderful Life Weekend, and the 5K run that's so big in the middle of December in upstate New York. And now in January we have a second event that it was actually bigger last year, I think, than the Wonderful Run Festival. So it's good for our local economy, that's for sure. And it's good for our name, our brand, of so much great history's happened here. And I've always maintained that there's still great history to come. And that last year was a great example of it.
Absolutely.
Great example of it. So fingers crossed, but we'll be out there. If you see me with a camera, I'm going to ask you why you're marching and where you're from, and just smile and answer.
Fantastic.
It'll be fun.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, it's so wonderful because what you just said speaks to the question that you and I talked about when we first sat down and decided to do this show. And it's the fact that Seneca Falls, the Finger Lakes region, has this incredible history and legacy to stand on. But the work isn't done. So our voice has to continue, right? Like, we can say this is a birthplace of women's rights, but the world has shifted in such a way that although that is something we can commemorate here, we also have to remember to be an active player in the conversation that is so relevant throughout the world, right? Because technology allows us to now be present in everybody else's lives. So the fact that we'll have this, documented history of everything that goes on next Saturday for people to watch anywhere, to be able to listen to the speeches, to be able to see the people, to be able to have the recap on Sunday morning, so that if you were there, not only do you get to kind of reflect and just see those highlights, but also sharing that with family and friends and continuing that ripple effect and being part of the conversation. So that is something that is so near and dear to my heart, is that we just continue to be that active player at the table.
I wondered last year, being off the, just 2.5 months after the election and inauguration day, it seemed like that was an impetus for the march as a backlash against the results of the election, I suppose. This year, it seems like there's a multitude of issues that have been in the forefront of the news, and some of it as a result of, everything from, the latest is the sexual harassment and the sexual assaults in Hollywood and the Me Too movement, but also the like you say, the equal pay. It just seems like so many women's issues have just all come up to the forefront right now. So I wonder if this will be bigger than last year, because it seemed like last year might have been like a one-time thing. At the time, it was like, this is great. Nobody was sure if we were going to have it again at the time, and then shortly after we hear we're going to have it again. And now that it's here, I wonder, will it be bigger? Will it be? Will it be? It could be. It could be. It seems like there's more issues now than there was last year, and it seemed like last year there was a lot to mobilize people, not just women, but people to come and march. And so, I don't know. It's exciting to see when we wake up Saturday morning what happens.
Yeah, Melina, how are the numbers trending in comparison to last year? Because from what I see, it looks pretty similar.
The numbers are similar and ahead of last year. But Jim, you make such a good point. Two responses. Initially, I do understand that most folks thought that it was a one-time gathering, but as you'll recall, the group of us that were organizing, we, from the very outset, knew that we were going to be doing this for at least 4 years. And the notion about the issues seemed to be more, and women's issues seem to be more in the forefront. None of what our presenters are going to be talking about are new issues. These issues have been women's issues, human rights issues forever in this country, my entire life, frankly. But what has happened is that I think the impetus from the activism that started last year is persisting, and what last year was really about, and what I talked about last year a lot, was the sustainability of the energy to have these issues be on the forefront. Some people call them women issues, but these are social justice issues.
Do you think the Me Too movement happens without the Women's March last year?
Oh yes, as a matter of fact, historically, the woman who started the Me Too movement, and her name right this minute escapes me, but that was several years ago that she began that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I believe it was out west that it began. It could be California. So yeah, but we're just hearing about it in the general masses are hearing about it. But yeah.
Let me ask you another question.
Okay.
In the long run, let's say 20 years from now, maybe even 10. Is it better for women? Will it have been better for women that Donald Trump won the election than Hillary? I mean, because the knee-jerk reaction was horrible for women and Hillary supporters and women in general. Most would say is a big setback because we had a chance. We're on the precipice of having a woman president. But just the reaction and the social movement that seems to have accelerated since Donald Trump won the election. Do you think in the long run, is that an odd way to think of it? That in the long run it might be better for equality and women's rights? And I don't know. It's a question. Yeah,
and it's a good question, and I think I think an answer can be either way or both, because you can look at the last election as the glass half full or the glass half empty. What I believe is that the mobilization of people who have long held social justice as part of their passion have been motivated to become active or more active around those issues. So if we look at it that way, it's certainly a plus. I think there's no going back from this. From this energy, there may be lulls, there may be slowdowns, but it is a new plateau, a new movement, a new energy that has infused us, and it's not only here in America; it's all over the world. We're seeing shifts all over the world, and it's a renewed kind of energy. So in the long run, to answer your question, yes, frankly I do think it's going to be beneficial.
Seems like whether it's a civil rights movement or almost any major social change, something has to happen that makes everybody pay attention.
Yeah.
In the civil rights movement, there was a black, I can't remember the name, but it was a black child from Chicago who had went to Mississippi. I can't believe I can't remember the name, but they were beaten, and it was documented by photos, and the whole country, all of a sudden just couldn't believe. And the mother of this child came down to seek justice, and that's because a lot of times I think people say, they go about their lives, they don't pay attention to things if it's not directly in their backyard or something that directly affects them. But something like that made people say, is that who we are as American people? So I just think any major change in the way our society operates, the bad stuff has to happen to make people realize that's not what we want or who we want to be.
Yeah. I think you're right about that, and I also think that whenever there's a change in any regard, thinking or action has to reach a critical mass for the change to actually happen. So I don't think, I think you're absolutely right.
One step back to take 5 steps forward.
Yeah. Yep. Well, which is still a forward movement. It's
right.
just slowed down for some of us that like it to happen quickly. Yeah.
And I remember in yoga teacher training, the one thing that the guru said to us that resonates here is you can't unknow these things.
Exactly.
Right. So once you have that experience, once that thing comes to pass, the energy is born. Yeah. Right. So if we don't look at it as good or bad, but this reality, and then we move forward. I loved your immediate answer, Melina, which is that it's good and bad, right? Mm-hmm. Like potentially, ultimately better. But this year feels so interesting because not only do we have the Persisters next weekend, January 20th, right? But I feel like there is this new crowd that really does relate to what Jim is talking about, of people who have literally told me that this year has woken them up, right? Mm-hmm. It's awakened within them this knowingness that they can't keep their voice from being at the table and in this conversation. And so that, I believe, is the energy you're talking about. That is that renewed sense and will continue on. So I'm eager to see not only who's showing up to join us and persist with us around the principles of women's equality next weekend, but also, who's locking arms and standing with us for the next few years to come and beyond, right? So thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any closing remarks, I would love to hear them.
I do. There's, I was remiss in the hour we've been talking, not to mention being here in Seneca Falls and Central New York is quite an honor for me. I find this area of the world to be sacred ground. The legacy that we stand on is certainly broader than our foremothers, the suffragists of the early wave in the mid 1800s and the later wave in the early 1900s. The legacy that we stand on in this area of the world is the legacy of social justice of the Haudenosaunee women, whom we know through school days as the Iroquois women, who built their nation and continue to build their nation on social justice for all, and are led by clan mothers for centuries and centuries and centuries.
And we will have the honor.
We do have the honor of standing on their sacred ground.
Yeah, and from hearing from one of our local clan mothers next week.
Exactly. Bear Clan Mother, her Mama Bear, as she's called, is going to be doing the opening blessing for us on Saturday.
So spectacular. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming today, Melina.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone out there who will be joining us next weekend, January 20th, for the Women March in Seneca Falls. I'm so looking forward to seeing you all there. And one more time, I just want a great thank you to Melina, to Jim, for our guests who came and traveled to be here as a friend in the crowd. Thank you for the water. But it's been a lovely day here in the studio, and I look forward to seeing you all again next month.